Here's what's actually happening on America's highways while the rest of the media scrolls past it. Washington is moving, again, to rewrite when you're allowed to work, when you're allowed to rest, and how you're allowed to live if you drive a truck for a living. They're calling it flexibility. That's the word. But the fine print tells a different story. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration just rolled out two pilot programs that could append the hours of service rules, the most contentious rules in trucking, for the first time since 2020. One program would let drivers pause the infamous 14-hour clock for up to 3 hours. The other would expand split sleeper options, think 6-4 or even 5-5, instead of the rigid 7-3 and 8-2 pairs. If that sounds technical, it is. It also determines whether you make delivery, miss a paycheck, or get pushed to drive when you're exhausted because a bureaucrat's stopwatch says so. Let's start with the clock pause. Imagine you start at 7 a.m. You've got 14 hours total to finish all driving by 9 p.m. Not just driving hours, the entire on-duty window. You get jammed in Atlanta, construction in Nashville, then a shipper makes you wait 2 hours at a dock. Under today's rules, that wasted time still eats your clock. Under the pilot, you could legally pause that window 30 minutes up to 3 hours so your driving limit does not evaporate while you're parked against your own will. Truckers have begged for this for years. Why? Because reality does not run on a federal spreadsheet. FMCSA now admits it wants to test whether giving adults a little control might reduce fatigue and improve safety. That's not radical. That's common sense. But in Washington, common sense only arrives as a pilot. The second program matters just as much. Split sleeper flexibility. If you've never lived in a sleeper berth, here's the short version. The current rule allows you to split your 10 hours off as long as one chunk is at least 7 hours in the bunk and the other is at least 2 hours, 7-3 or 8-2. Drivers say that's still too rigid. Sometimes your body wants 5 hours now and 5 later. Sometimes it's 6 and 4. Sometimes you want to nap at noon and finish off duty at night to miss rush hour. FMCSA now proposes to let 256 drivers test those 5-5 and 6-4 splits to see if safety changes. Again, the agency isn't exactly leaping. It's tiptoeing. 256 volunteers out of millions of CDL holders. But for once, they're tiptoeing in the right direction. Of course, the truckers who pushed this for a decade aren't shocked. OIDA filed petitions back in 2018 to allow a 3-hour off-duty break that pauses the day. The idea was simple. Let drivers manage their own fatigue and avoid high-risk windows like rush hour. But the final 2020 hours of service update never delivered a true pause. Instead, we got a modest sleeper tweak dressed up as a reform. Now the government is circling back to test what working people asked for in the first place. Why the delay? Because regulators hate losing control. And the 14-hour rule is control over your time, your schedule, your life. And let's be honest about the nightly reality out there. If you've ever read the trucker forums, the last honest focus group in America, you know how this works. Drivers swap war stories about the 14-hour trap. My 3.5 hours of duty did not help. The clock kept bleeding. Or the constant confusion about what counts as a legal split and what doesn't, depending on which ELD you're chained to. Even when a driver is trying to obey the rule, software quirks and bad training turn compliance into roulette. The fact that the most important fatigue regulation in freight depends on ready threads and guesswork is itself a policy failure. If you want safer roads, give people rules they can understand at 2 a.m. on the shoulder of I-40, not a logical puzzle. Now here's why this matters, part no one will tell you. America runs on time. Everything you buy arrives on a schedule. And the single biggest driver of bad decisions behind the wheel is not greed. It's ticking clocks, artificial, punitive clocks. You can call a driver reckless, or you can admit we designed a system where a human being is punished for pulling over during a storm, or for avoiding rush hour, or for taking the nap his body actually needs. The pilot programs finally concede a basic adult truth. The safest driver is the one who controls his own time. But in 2025, politics touches everything, including the steering wheel. The same Department of Transportation that gave us speed limiter pushes and a constant stream of micromanagement now says it's listening to drivers. Why? Maybe because the freight market is fragile. Theft and fraud are up, and the cost of everything from diesel to insurance keeps rising. Maybe because a supply chain limping out of a great recession can't afford dead time created by rules that ignore ports, weather, and urban choke points. Or maybe because the people who actually run this economy, drivers, finally had enough and made themselves heard. So what's in the actual proposal? 2 Federal Register notices, quietly posted, recruiting a total of around 512 CDL holders, have to test the 14-hour pause, have to test sleeper splits. They'll wear devices, share ELD data, and FMCSA will measure crash surrogates, fatigue, circadian alignment, all this stuff academics love. If the numbers show equal or better safety, the agency can expand the options nationwide. If it doesn't, they'll claim the spreadsheet told them no, and the stopwatch returns. That's the stake here. Whether grown adults in control of 80,000 pounds are trusted like professionals or treated like teenagers past curfew. And spare us the peril clutching from safety lobbyists who've never logged a mile in a winter whiteout. They'll say flexibility is code for exploitation, that carriers will use pauses to squeeze more out of drivers. Maybe some will try. Bad companies always game rules. But the answer to a bad boss isn't a bad rule. It's freedom to say no, to choose a different carrier, to use a pause to avoid the exact conditions that cause crashes, fatigue, and congestion. You want fewer wrecks? Stop forcing drivers to sprint the last hour of a running clock through Dallas at 5 p.m. Let them wait it out legally, then roll at 8. That's not less safe. That's common sense backed by the reality every driver understands. Meanwhile, remember what the current rule actually is. Right now, to be legal, you can split 10 hours of only if one chunk is at least 7 consecutive hours in the sleeper and the other is at least 2. Together they don't count against your 14. That's fine for some runs, but biology does not read the Federal Register. Plenty of drivers sleep better in 2 medium blocks than 1 long one. If the pilot proves 5.5 or 6.4 works without increasing risk, then we should unlock it nationwide and stop pretending the human brain changes because a regulator prefers a round number. There's a larger principle here, and it goes beyond trucking. We live in a country where the people who make things and move things are treated as a problem to be managed by people who do neither. The rule makers don't sit at a guard shack for 4 hours while a shipper finds the paperwork. They don't sleep in a vibrating parking lot behind a warehouse because there is no safe parking within 50 miles. They don't drive into the eye of a thunderstorm because a clock started ticking 14 hours ago and won't stop. But they do make the rules. And when the rules fail, They blame the drivers. So here is what should happen next. 1. Broaden the pilots and run them fast. We don't need 2 years to figure out drivers can avoid rush hour if you let them. 2. Pair flexibility with real enforcement against shippers and receivers who burn a driver's clock with impunity. If a government can track your ELD to the minute, it can certainly track who's stealing your day. 3. Simplify the HOS handbook so a new driver does not need a Reddit Sherpa to decipher whether his 2-hour nap was in sequence with an 8-hour sleeper block according to FMCSA subsection whatever. If you can explain the rule in a paragraph, the rule is bad. And 4. Remember who this is for. Not the mega carriers lobbyists. Not the tech companies flogging compliance tools. It's for the single mom hauling reefer overnight to keep your grocery store cold. For the owner-operator with his name on the door who can predict the I-95 bottleneck in his sleep. For the 20-year vet who knows that sometimes pulling off for 90 minutes at a rest area outside Knoxville is the safest move he'll make all week. Those are the people the pause respects. Those are the people the split sleeper finally trusts. Will Washington get it right? History says no. The bureaucracy's instinct is always to promise freedom with one hand and take it back with the other. But the fact that these pilots exist at all means drivers force the issue. They kept calling, they kept filing comments, they kept telling the truth about a rule book that does not match the road. And now the agency has to face an obvious reality. Flexibility isn't the opposite of safety. In a world where freight is unpredictable, flexibility is safety. So pay attention. When the public comment window opens, weigh in. If you're a driver, tell them how a pause would keep you out of the blender in Houston at 4 p.m. If you're a shipper, admit how your docks really operate and why punishing drivers for your delays is insane. If you're a safety advocate, explain why forcing a human to drive to breathe a timer is somehow safer than letting him wait for a storm to pass. And if you're an American who likes food on shelves and packages at your door, ask yourself whether you want the people who deliver them treated like professionals or like police with ankle monitors. Because that's the choice. Either we trust the people who keep this country running to manage their time like adults, or we keep pretending a stopwatch in DC knows the weather in Wyoming. The pilots are our chance to pick the former. Don't let the stopwatch win again. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your support helps the channel grow, and it lets me keep bringing you more content just like this. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.